Hey there, darling. I'm Jess. Welcome to the Farmer's Table. If you've been here with me for very long, you have probably heard me tout the benefits of making your own bread products. Whether you are an experienced cook or you're brand new in the kitchen, I highly encourage you learning to make your own bread product. I hear people all the time talk about how intimidated they are by using yeast or sourdough starter. And yes, there is a little bit of a learning curve, but the reward is definitely worth learning. Think about when you go into the grocery store and you see that long aisle of bread all wrapped in plastic, or the bakery section with all the pastries and the cookies and the baked goods. Consider the fact that those are highly perishable items, and all of those items have gone from the factory where they were made to some sort of warehouse or shipping facility, and then to these places where they're sold. They then have to sit on the shelf for whatever number of days they sit there before the consumer purchases them and takes them home to consume them. You're looking at, from the point of production to the point of them actually being eaten, at least several days. And bread products were not things that were really meant to be made and to last for several days as if they were fresh. There's a reason why we get really excited about fresh bread, because that's when it's at its best. So a lot of those products have additives that are put in them to make the bottom line make sense for the business that's selling them. And the jury's still out on how those additives and preservatives affect the bodies that they get put into. Aside from the health benefits of making your own bread products, it makes way more economic sense. With pretty simple ingredients, you can make most of those things that you see in the grocery store for a fraction of the price. And that brings us to our recipe today. Today, I want to share a recipe with you for homemade crescent rolls. So I'm excited to congratulate my friend Melissa K. Norris on her brand new book. This is releasing here in just a couple of weeks, and mine is getting thoroughly initiated into my kitchen. I have to say, there may be hazing involved as far as the initiation of cookbooks in the Farmer's Table kitchen, because they end up getting pretty torn up. But I think that the mark of a very well-loved cookbook and a good cookbook is that over the years it is stained, bent, folded, falling apart, because it's spending a lot of time in the presence of preparing food. So I think that this is going to end up being one of those cookbooks. I got my advanced copy a couple of days ago, and I really appreciate the fact that Melissa has written a cookbook for the cookbook reader. My cookbook collection is vast. I actually learned to cook from cookbooks. When I was about 20 years old, I started getting cookbooks and I started cooking through them. Not necessarily front to back. I would skip around some just so that I was making recipes that made sense with what we needed to eat. But I would cook every recipe in a cookbook. And this grew my cooking skill exponentially. It ultimately taught me how to not need cookbooks as much, which is awesome. That's really the goal. I got this book in and I was reading through it, and I came across this recipe for crescent rolls. And interestingly, the story that she was sharing with us was that this was a staple in her family's Easter dinner. It was her husband's grandma's recipe. And I thought, you know what, we're gonna try that. I actually don't have a great crescent roll recipe that I routinely use, and I'm sure my kids would appreciate if I did have one, because they absolutely love any sort of like dinner roll situation, especially crescent rolls. Every recipe I've ever made of Melissa's over the years, from her email list or her other books and stuff like that, they've all turned out really well. So I'm excited to give this one a try. All right, so I've got my flour out. Today I'm using all-purpose flour. If you're going to be starting regular baking, I really highly suggest finding a source for bulk flour that makes sense for you. I know we live in all different places and have different resources available to us as far as purchasing. As a general rule, you will save so much money buying bulk flour. And if you are going to say, okay, I'm going to start making my family's bread products, you can get through the flour a lot faster, especially if you have, at least a few people in your family. I got this big container from our local restaurant store, and I also purchased my yeast bulk. This is something that if you are going to do a lot of baking, buying those little packages of yeast, the price is going to add up really quick. And remember, anywhere where we can cut our price down on our ingredients, it's multiplying our end savings. And especially if we're going to make habits out of these things, and we're going to start making dinner rolls with dinner once a week, and we're going to start making our sandwich bread, and you can see that this is going to start adding up really quick, and we want the savings to add up. not what we're spending. So our first step, we want to start proofing our yeast. All that means is we're gonna take some warm water. This recipe calls for ½ cup. And we're gonna put 2½ teaspoons of yeast in that warm water so that it can bloom. We'll set it to the side and give it about 5 minutes. Blooming your yeast separately serves two purposes. One, it helps it perform properly in the recipe. The other thing is that it shows you that your yeast is actually active. If you do a lot of baking and you know that you fairly recently opened your yeast, you don't really have to worry about that so much. But if you don't, or you're grabbing some yeast up from the top of the pantry that you're not sure how long it's been there, you'd really rather find out it's a dud in a ½ cup of water instead of in, you know, all of your ingredients after you've waited an hour for them to rise. Now I'm gonna make this in my KitchenAid mixer. She has instructions in here if you're doing it by hand. In the bowl of my stand mixer, I'm going to add a ½ cup of warm milk, kind of the same temperature as the water, about 100 degrees. Don't wanna go too hot because I don't wanna damage my yeast. A ½ cup of melted butter, an egg, which I'm gonna crack it into this butter bowl first, and a ½ cup of honey. So when you add things like milk and butter into bread recipes, it's called enrichments, and it makes for a much softer end product in your bread. And then of course the honey is going to add sweetness and also help aid the texture. The honey will also help feed the yeast so that it expands well. And now back into my bowl, I'm going to put my yeast. See how bubbly that was? That means it's gonna work. So into our bowl, we want to add between 3½ and 4 cups of bread flour. One of the reasons I like keeping my flour in these big containers is because I can fluff it up really nicely before I go to scoop out of it. If you're using a recipe that doesn't call for weights, instead it calls for measurements, it's really important to make sure that you don't pack your flour down into your cup. And that's usually why when you're following a recipe that calls for measurements instead of weights, it will say 3½ to 4. There will be like a range because it's accounting for how you scoop your flour. It's accounting for all of the many things that can affect bread making. All right, so there's 1 cup. And give it a little stir. 2 cups. All right, the dough hook can take it from here. Also, totally start with your paddle attachment and switch over to your dough hook, but I am the queen of trying to have less things that I have to wash afterwards. If at any point you're noticing flour stuck to the sides of your bowl, just turn your machine off and scrape them down. All right, I just added the other ½ cup of flour, and we'll see how this does and if we need that other ½ cup. At this point, we also want to put in a teaspoon of salt. Here I want to show you the sped up process of adding flour. This is after I had 3½ cups in, and I was starting to see the dough stick to the sides of the bowl. So I began adding a little bit more at a time, maybe like a couple of tablespoons, that last ½ cup flour that the recipe says may be necessary. And what I'm waiting for is for my dough to form a ball that no longer sticks to the side of the bowl. There it is. That's what I'm looking for. All right, now that our dough is pulling away from the sides of the bowl, it's not sticking at all. I used almost the full 4 cups, and that's going to be different. That could be different even the next time I bake this. Sometimes it's raining outside, and so the flour behaves differently. So always start on the low end of what a recipe recommends, and then add little by little until you achieve the desired result. I'm going to turn this back on and knead it on low for 7 minutes. My timer just went off, 7 minutes of kneading, and I love the fact that Melissa included this little tip in this recipe. So there is a trick that you can use to know that your dough has been kneaded enough. Basically what you do is you take the dough and you stretch it, and you do what's called a window pane test. And if you can stretch your dough where you have a spot that's thin enough where you can see light through it, but that it's not tearing, that means that you've kneaded enough. What kneading does is it activates all the gluten in the bread and creates the stretchiness, which is what's going to give it its texture when it rises. So I'm just gonna let this dough rise in the bowl from my mixer. I'm just gonna grab it out, spray it real good in here with some avocado oil. drop my dough in there and then spray the top of it. And then I'm gonna cover it with a damp flour sack towel and sit it over here until it's doubled in size. Should take about an hour. My dough has doubled. It looks very lovely. I'm gonna go ahead and do a really mild sprinkling here. You don't want to put a whole lot of flour down when you've got dough like this. And I'm gonna lay it out and kind of try to keep it somewhat circular, because the next step is to roll this out in a circle. All right, she says we want about a 12-inch circle, and it's gonna be about a 1/4 of an inch thick, so I'm almost there. Okay, so the recipe calls for 2 tablespoons of softened butter and says to spread it over the top, which I know you could probably do this with a tool, but I'm gonna use my fingers because when it comes to spreading something like this, that gives me a better feel for it. Clean hands in the kitchen are an incredibly useful tool. I feel like my butter could have been a little softer for this. It's just sitting out on the counter in my house, but the kitchen's kind of cool right now. Now we're gonna prepare a baking sheet. Just gonna spritz some avocado oil here on this baking stone. And I've got a pizza cutter, and what we're going to do next is cut this into 16 pieces. So we'll start by going in half. And then we're gonna take each slice and starting on the thicker end, we're going to roll them like this. Y'all remember when I told you I really didn't start all of this to make a cooking show? I was really just trying to make dinner. We're gonna deviate a bit from our plan because I need to make dinner. I just grabbed some ham and some cheese out of my fridge. I have one lovely tray of the rolls here. My oven's almost up to temp. We want to bake these for 12 to 15 minutes at 400 degrees, so it's almost there. And I started rolling up a second tray, but I just got a bunch of plants delivered this afternoon, and I really want to be in my garden, like ASAP. So I was rolling these up, and I had kind of planned on doing a more elaborate dinner. I was expecting that delivery to come tomorrow. But I'm gonna pivot. I'm gonna make some ham and cheese rolls right now for my kids. Maya and I have some leftovers we can eat after we get done with the garden stuff. And I wanna show you guys this just because it's useful. Here we have some lovely homemade from scratch dough made with real good ingredients. And I'm going to take these triangles, these crescents, and take piece of ham and a little slice of cheddar cheese, and I'm gonna roll these up with this. I got another tray ready. She instructed point side underneath. I don't think I did that on the other tray. Oh well. So on the instructions for just the rolls is that when you pull them out, you just take some butter and just rub it on top so it'll melt. For these like sandwich roll-ups, I'm just gonna give this a little spray and sprinkle some garlic powder. Now I'll do some little salt on here, not a lot, but just a sprinkle on top. I make variations of this kind of thing, especially when I just need like a fast meal for my kids. I just have my little boys here tonight, so I don't have to make a whole bunch of them. But this works nice too for baking like the night before, and then you can stick them in the fridge, and yes, they'll be cold eating them the next day, but you can like take these on a picnic lunch or pack them for lunches, and you just bake them whatever amount of time the dough called for. Okay, I was not a good student. I'm gonna show y'all. Melissa actually gave this instruction. I just wasn't paying attention whenever I did the first round. Imagine that. I'm not the best at following recipes, but these things look awesome. Okay, I didn't put them point side down, so I'll be the guinea pig that shows the importance of that. It's not a big deal. They're obviously still edible, but the ones that were point side down, like here, are definitely much prettier. These things are so soft. They smell so good. Now let's melt a little butter on top. Y'all think? Look pretty good, huh? All right, so I'm just gonna put these in a bowl. Okay, I can do this now without burning my fingers. There we go, guys. Beautiful, soft. I cook this stuff for my family even though I can't eat it because, you know, food is my love language. And I just want you to know that tear, that steamy tear, that was for you. That was me giving that to you. So you would know that you need to make these and experience them yourself. And I'm not gonna bite it because I can't. Because I can't eat it. But if you can, you should. Anyone for me too. Now who wants to see what of my sandwich creation? I think they'll probably be really good. Oh yeah, look at that. Here I have the lovely sandwich rolls, which have ham and cheddar inside. The dough, which has seasoning on top. Same beautiful soft crescent dough, but with that more substantial filling. I will take 2 parts mustard and 1 part honey and mix that together. Make like a honey mustard dip that my kids can dip these in, and they will eat these for dinner, and I will go play in my garden. I hope you guys enjoy this recipe. I'll put a link. I know Melissa has a landing page on her site for this book. She's got some offers for the people who are pre-ordering. I wanted to make sure that I got this out sooner rather than later because pre-orders are really important to the success of a book, and I know that from having written books before, and I wanted to help my friend. And I've been going on calling this a cookbook, but I should also say it does have like 100 recipes in it, but it also has like some salves and tinctures and like stuff for the holidays. And she said this is the resource she wished she had when she dove off into homesteading. So it's got a lot of stuff, lots of food recipes, but there's even more than that. So congratulations, Melissa. It's a beautiful work, and I am thankful to add it to my collection. And I'm sure my children are going to be singing your praises here in just a little bit when they dig into this dinner. Thank you all for hanging out with me today, and all the days you do. I bless you. Until next time.